位前輩，你哋要我講出我應金毛獅王謝遜嘅下落，無非係想搶奪佢手上嘅屠龍寶刀，成為武林至尊。我就俾大家一個交代。
你要認住呢班人個樣，一個一個咁認住，佢哋每一個人身上都染滿咗你阿爹嘅血。
我身負血海深仇，白英和每一個皇孫，
有人指稱係白眉鷹王嘅外孫張無忌嘅，就格殺勿論。
你話咩話？我嘅外孫？
係啊，佢哋會派人扮你個外孫嚟暗算你啊！
我咩係周無忌啊？
佢就係張翠山個仔，武功咁好嘅。
There are characters in the history of cinema that belong to one actor so completely that it becomes almost impossible to imagine anyone else in the role. Sherlock Holmes belongs to Basil Rathbone for one generation and Benedict Cumberbatch for another. James Bond reshuffles every decade. But in the world of Chinese martial arts cinema, the character of Wong Fei-hung belongs to Jet Li in a way that feels almost cosmically ordained. Wong Fei-hung was a real man, a physician and martial artist who lived in Guangdong province in the 19th century, a figure so embedded in Chinese popular culture that over 100 films had already been made about him before Jet Li was born. Quan Ta-king played the character more than 70 times between 1949 and 1981. The role was practically a genre unto itself, and then, in 1991, director Tsui Hark made a decision that seemed almost reckless at the time. He cast a 30-year-old wushu champion who had spent the last decade making films in mainland China, handed him the most iconic role in Hong Kong cinema history, and turned him loose with a budget and a vision that nobody had applied to this character before. What happened next is what we are here to talk about today. 7 films, the years that defined not just a career but an era. The period when Jet Li stopped being a promising martial arts film star and became something that Chinese cinema had never quite produced before, a genuine cultural icon whose work resonated across generations and across the world. We have saved one entry on this list for a film so wildly different from everything around it that watching it still feels like discovering a secret that most people kept to themselves. Stay with us. This one earns every minute.
一定要企出嚟。
By 1997, the Once Upon a Time in China series had already produced 5 films, and the question hanging over this 6th entry was a legitimate one. Did anyone have anything left to say? The answer turned out to be yes, but only if you were willing to move the story to an entirely different continent and strip the main character of everything that defined him. Once Upon a Time in China and America sends Wong Fei-hung to the American West in the 1890s, a premise that sounds like a marketing gimmick until you actually watch the film and realize that director Sammo Hung has found something genuinely interesting inside it. When Fei-hung suffers a head injury early in the film that leaves him with amnesia, he is suddenly just a man who cannot remember his name or his training or his purpose, wandering through a landscape that is completely alien to him. Jet Li plays the amnesiac Fei-hung with a vulnerability that the earlier films in the series never required of him. Without his identity, without his skills, without the moral framework that has always guided his decisions, the character becomes genuinely lost. And watching Jet Li navigate that lostness is unexpectedly moving. The film also engages seriously with the treatment of Chinese immigrants in the American West during this period, which gives it a political dimension that sits unusually well next to the action sequences. When Fei-hung eventually recovers his memory and his abilities, the moment lands with real emotional weight because the film has taken the time to show you what it cost him to get there. It is not the strongest entry in the series, but it is one of the bravest. The third chapter of the Wong Fei-hung saga takes a significant tonal shift from its predecessors, and the decision is a smart one. Where the first 2 films carried the weight of genuine historical trauma, the Opium War, the Boxer Rebellion, the systematic humiliation of China at the hands of foreign powers, Once Upon a Time in China 3 takes a breath and builds its central conflict around a lion dance competition. That sounds considerably less dramatic than it actually is. In the context of the film, the lion dance competition is the arena through which rival martial arts factions are fighting for dominance and political influence, and director Tsui Hark stages the competition sequences with the same visual imagination he brought to the action in the first 2 films. What makes Once Upon a Time in China 3 particularly interesting for students of the series is the way it develops the relationship between Wong Fei-hung and Ant 13, played with remarkable warmth and intelligence by Rosamund Kwan. By this point in the series, they have built enough history together on screen that their interactions carry genuine weight, and the film generously gives them space to be funny and tender with each other in ways that the more serious first 2 films could not quite afford. Jet Li is as physically assured here as he has ever been, and the climactic lion dance sequence is genuinely thrilling in a way that requires you to completely accept the internal logic of what you are watching. Once you do, it is one of the most inventive action set pieces in the entire series. Here is where the list takes its sharpest and most surprising turn. Last Hero in China from 1993 is the film that almost nobody in the West ever discusses in the same breath as the serious Jet Li classics. And that critical neglect is a genuine injustice because this film is absolutely hilarious and knows it. Directed by Wong Jing, who has built an entire career on the principle that entertainment and dignity do not always need to occupy the same space, Last Hero in China is a full-throated parody of the Once Upon a Time in China series, except that it stars Jet Li playing a version of Wong Fei-hung, who keeps stumbling into the most absurd possible situations, while maintaining his complete personal dignity throughout. The genius of Jet Li's performance here is that he never winks at the camera. He plays everything completely straight, while the film descends into increasingly ridiculous territory around him. There is a sequence in the third act where Fei-hung must disguise himself as a rooster and engage in combat while maintaining that disguise that should not work at all and works completely because Jet Li commits to it with the same total physical conviction he brings to everything else. The action choreography is handled by Corey Yun, and even inside the comedic framework he finds moments of genuine brilliance. Last Hero in China is the proof that Jet Li always understood something that his more serious-minded admirers sometimes forget. A performer who can make you laugh with his body has mastered something that most action stars never even attempt.
各位前輩，你哋要我講出我影金毛獅王謝遜嘅下落，無非係想搶奪佢手上嘅屠龍寶刀，成為武林至尊。我就俾大家個交代。
你要認住呢班人個樣，一個一個咁認住，佢哋每一個人身上都染滿咗你阿爹嘅血。
我身負血海深仇。大英王每一個王先，
有人指稱係白眉鷹王嘅外孫張無忌嘅，就格殺勿論。
你話咩話？我嘅外孫？
係啊，佢哋會派人扮你個外孫嚟暗算你啊！
我咩嚟周無忌啊？
佢就係張翠山個仔，武功咁好嘅。
This is the secret on the list. The entry we promised at the beginning that most Western audiences have never encountered, and the one that genuinely reframes what you thought you knew about what Jet Li was capable of during this period. Kung Fu Cult Master from 1993, adapted from one of the most beloved wuxia novels in Chinese literary history, is a film that operates in an almost entirely different register from everything else Jet Li was making at the time. It is a pure wuxia fantasy, completely unconcerned with historical realism, built around supernatural martial arts powers, complex political rivalries between ancient martial arts sects, and a protagonist whose journey from powerlessness to mastery forms one of the most satisfying arcs in the entire genre. Jet Li plays Zhong Wuji, a young man born under circumstances that make him an outcast from every major martial arts faction in the world of the film. The character spends much of the story absorbing punishment and humiliation before a series of encounters unlock abilities that even the most powerful masters cannot comprehend. The arc is classical in the purest sense, but the execution is extraordinary. The visual imagination on display throughout Kung Fu Cult Master is genuinely breathtaking. Director Wong Jing, working here in a mode considerably more ambitious than his usual output, creates a world where the internal logic of wuxia power is taken completely seriously, and the results are sequences that feel genuinely mythological rather than merely spectacular. The tragedy of Kung Fu Cult Master is that the film was intended as the first part of a two-part story, and the second part was never made. The ending leaves everything unresolved in a way that drove audiences in 1993 to genuine frustration. Watching it today, you have to make peace with that incompleteness And when you do, you find one of the most original and ambitious martial arts films Jet Li ever made. If the first film established Wong Fei-hung as a complex and fully human character, the second went further and gave him the most dramatically compelling villain of the entire series. The White Lotus Society, the xenophobic religious cult at the center of Once Upon a Time in China 2, is a genuinely frightening creation precisely because its ideology is not entirely unreasonable given the historical context. China is being carved up by foreign powers. Tradition is being dismantled. The anger the White Lotus channels is real, even if their methods are catastrophic. Against this backdrop, Tsui Hark delivers what many consider the single best action sequence of the entire series. The confrontation inside a government building where Wong Fei-hung must fight his way through a burning corridor with bolts of cloth as his only weapon. The sequence is a masterpiece of choreographic invention and physical storytelling that established a standard for wuxia action cinema that filmmakers are still trying to reach. Donnie Yen appears as a military officer who begins as an antagonist and becomes something considerably more complicated, and the scenes he shares with Jet Li crackle with a physical and dramatic energy that reflects two genuinely extraordinary martial artists operating at the peak of their abilities. Their confrontation is one of the great action movie duels of the 1990s, a statement that holds up without qualification decades later. Once Upon a Time in China 2 is bigger, faster, angrier, and more politically engaged than its predecessor. It is the rare sequel that does not so much improve on the original as exist alongside it as an equal. Ping Yoon directing, Michelle Yeoh co-starring, Jet Li at the absolute peak of his physical abilities. The story of the legendary founder of Tai Chi and the philosophical question of whether martial arts power can corrupt the person who possesses it. Tai Chi Master from 1993 is, by any reasonable measure, one of the greatest martial arts films ever made, and it remains deeply underappreciated in Western discussions of the genre. The film follows two childhood friends who grow up together in a Shaolin monastery before being expelled and sent out into a world that neither of them is prepared for. One adapts by seeking power within the established structures of a corrupt military. The other loses his sanity under the pressure of what he witnesses before recovering it in the most unexpected way through the observation of how water, reeds, and the natural world move. The sequence in which Jet Li's character achieves his enlightenment and discovers the principles of Tai Chi is one of the most visually poetic passages in Hong Kong cinema. The idea that the most powerful martial art emerges not from force but from yielding, not from resistance but from flow, is communicated entirely through movement and image without a single explanatory line of dialogue. Michelle Yeoh matches Jet Li completely, which is an achievement that very few performers in any era of action cinema have managed. Their chemistry is not romantic but something rarer and more interesting, a genuine physical and intellectual respect between equals who happen to be playing characters with very different destinies. Tai Chi Master is a film about what happens to human beings under political and social pressure, told through the language of martial arts philosophy, executed with an artistry that takes your breath away. It deserves to be in every serious conversation about the greatest action films ever made.
The first in a remarkable trilogy that thrust action star Jet Li into international superstardom. Starring as the legendary hero Wong Fei-hung, Jet Li brings to life a man whose courage was surpassed only by his skills. In the film that set the standard for martial arts excellence, by which all others are compared. Directed by award-winning action king, Tsui Hark. Once Upon a Time in China is a cinematic experience unlike any other. Experience for the first time the long-time classic, Once Upon a Time in China.
There are moments in the history of popular cinema where everything comes together so completely that the result transcends the category it was created for. Once Upon a Time in China from 1991 is one of those moments. Director Tsui Hark came to this film with a specific and serious intention. He wanted to use the legend of Wong Fei-hung to say something true about China's relationship with modernity, about the experience of a culture being forced to confront the question of what it must abandon and what it must protect in order to survive in a changing world. He wanted to make a martial arts film that was also a genuine work of art. What he got was all of that and more. Jet Li's Wong Fei-hung is not a simple hero. He is a man of absolute moral conviction, navigating a world where moral clarity is becoming increasingly impossible. He believes in Chinese tradition and Chinese dignity. He also understands that refusing to engage with the modern world will destroy everything he is trying to protect. The tension between those two positions drives every scene in the film, and Jet Li communicates it entirely through presence and movement rather than dialogue. The action sequences are nothing less than revolutionary. Choreographer Yuen Wu Ping built sequences that used the physical environment, ladders, ropes, scaffolding, the architecture of the spaces the characters inhabit, as active participants in the combat rather than merely backdrop. The latter fight sequence in the film's climax is still being studied by action film directors and choreographers today, more than 30 years after it was made. What makes Once Upon a Time in China the defining achievement of this period in Jet Li's career is not any single element but the totality of what it accomplishes. It is a film with something genuine to say about history and identity and loss, delivered through some of the most extraordinary physical filmmaking ever committed to celluloid, performed by a man who understood instinctively how to make his body tell a story that words could not reach. It is not just the best film of Jet Li's career. It is one of the best action films ever made. Full stop. 7 films, 1 character, and in between them, an argument for why the early 1990s in Hong Kong represent one of the great moments in the history of popular cinema. What Tsui Hark and Jet Li built together with the Wong Fei-hung series was something genuinely rare. They took a character that had been played over 100 times and found something inside him that had never been excavated before. A man not just of extraordinary physical ability, but of genuine moral seriousness. A person trying to do the right thing in a world that keeps changing the definition of what the right thing is. That resonance is why these films still matter. Not just as action movies, extraordinary as the action is, but as portraits of a culture in transition, told through the language of the human body at its most disciplined and most expressive. Which of these 7 films hit you hardest? Did Once Upon a Time in China arrive in your life at exactly the right moment and rearrange something in the way you think about what movies can do? Did Tai Chi Master make you want to understand the philosophy behind the movement? Did Kung Fu Cult Master leave you genuinely frustrated that the second part never arrived? Tell us in the comments. The best conversations on this channel always happen down there. If this video reminded you why these films mattered, hit the like button and let the algorithm know that this kind of content deserves to find its audience. Subscribe so you are here for Step 3, where we follow Jet Li into the most creatively daring period of his Hong Kong career and count down the 7 films that proved he was not just an action star, but a genuine film artist with something to say. The next chapter is already written. We will see you there.